That night, under the warm golden lights of a fine restaurant in downtown Seattle, my mother, Diane, leaned toward the waiter, her voice soft as silk yet sharp enough to cut skin. "We didn't order for her. Just bring her some bread." She placed the basket in front of me, while Sophia, their perfect daughter, giggled as she sliced into her $420 steak dripping with sauce. My father sipped his wine and sneered. "Be grateful you were even invited." I sat there in silence, listening to the clinking of forks and knives against porcelain like tiny blades scraping against my heart. But when the bill arrived, I stood up, looked at them one last time, and said slowly, "Send the bill to the ones who ate." That night, I didn't just walk away from the table, I walked away from the toxic family that had chained me for 34 years. What about you? Have you ever had to pay a price just to be loved by your own family? And where are you watching this from? I'm truly curious to see how far this story will travel. My name is Emma Larson. I'm a lead software engineer at a tech company in South Lake Union, Seattle. I work day and night with lines of code, earning a steady salary of about $200,000 a year, not wealthy, but enough to live comfortably in my small two-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, where I can see the city lights shimmer at night. I like the quiet. After 10 hours at the office, I usually come home, cook a simple dinner, and play jazz, the only sound that reminds me I'm more than just a machine. Yet, even in my calmest moments, I can never fully escape the invisible chain called family. For 15 years, I sent them money, paid off their debts, covered shopping bills, hospital expenses, parties, even meaningless luxuries. I did it all just to hear the words, "We're proud of you." But that day never came. In my parents' eyes, there was only one child worthy of their pride, Sophia Larson. She was 5 years younger than me, the family star, the one my mother called her precious gem. Sophia was a fashion influencer with 12,000 followers on Instagram, her photos perfectly color-graded, her smile glowing under the lights of upscale restaurants I had only ever walked past. My parents were obsessed with that world, as if it were an extension of themselves. They talked about Sophia like she was royalty. "She has such impeccable taste," my mother once said. "You should learn to be more confident, Emma, dress brighter." When she said brighter, I knew she really meant, don't outshine your sister. I'd grown used to being second place. Ever since we were kids, Sophia had been the center of their universe. I was 10 when my mother threw a birthday party for her at Woodland Park, balloons, kids everywhere, a 3-tier cake. I remember standing in the doorway of the living room, wearing my favorite blue dress, quietly asking, "Can I come too, Mom?" She looked at me, smiled gently, and said, "Emma, don't bother your sister. Today is her day." That day, I sat alone in the kitchen, eating the leftover crumbs of cake. I remember the sharp sweetness of the frosting and the salt of my tears. When I got to high school, I earned a partial scholarship. It was the first time I ever saw a spark of pride in my father's eyes, but it lasted only a few minutes. He said, "Good job, Emma." Then turned to my mother and added, "We could use her savings to help Sophia study design in New York, right?" I thought they were joking. But a few weeks later, the summer job savings I had carefully built vanished, leaving my account almost empty. They told me it was just temporary. That temporary lasted forever. I had to take out extra loans to finish college. When I finally graduated, my parents didn't come. I stood in the courtyard of the University of Washington, watching other families hug, laugh, and take pictures together. My phone buzzed with one single message. "Congrats, Mom and Dad are busy helping Sophia with her ad photo shoot. We'll celebrate another time." I smiled when I read it, smiled like it didn't hurt. I used to believe that if I just worked harder, they would see me. After graduation, there was no time for dreams or passion projects like people always talk about. I needed money not for myself, but for them. I took my first job at a small startup in Seattle as a data engineer. I'd arrive at the office by 7 a.m., leave after the streetlights came on, and sometimes sleep on the couch between lines of code and bug reports. For the first 3 years, I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, saving every dollar I could, thinking that if I kept going long enough, my parents would finally see me differently. And they did look, but not the way I hoped. They looked at my bank account. I still remember the first phone call that started the endless years of being drained dry. It was a Friday night. I was at the office, about to head home, when my phone rang. My mother's voice came through, panicked. "Emma, your father's in the hospital. They said he needs an MRI, and insurance won't cover all of it." I dropped everything, ran out of the building into the rain, listening to her cry while trying to calm her down. In the end, the bill came to $8,000. I paid it immediately, without hesitation. I thought it was the right thing to do. My father never said thank you. A week later, he sent me a photo of himself at a restaurant with the caption, "Good thing I'm healthy enough to keep working for the family." I stared at that message for several minutes, searching for even the faintest sign of gratitude. There was none. Then came Sophia, the beloved pride of the Larson family. Another evening, the phone rang again. "Hey sis," her voice was sweet as honey. "I'm about to open my fashion boutique, but the bank hasn't approved my loan yet. If I can't raise more funds, I'll have to cancel the launch." I asked, "How much do you need?" Her answer, "Not much, maybe 15,000. I'll pay you back as soon as things settle." I believed her. That night, I transferred the money, even though my account had less than 10,000 left after rent. 3 months later, the boutique opened. I showed up only to see a banner reading, "Sponsored by the generosity of Richard and Diane Larson," hanging proudly out front, while I, the one who actually paid, was introduced as the supportive sister. My mother beamed for the cameras, and Sophia pulled me aside, whispering, "Let's not talk about money here, okay? It's not classy." From then on, the calls of complaint became routine. Every time my phone lit up with the word, "Mom," I already knew what it meant. My bank balance was about to shrink. Sometimes her voice would sound weak. "My back hurts, I need a few sessions at the therapy spa." Other times it was, "Your father's stressed, I want him to relax at the golf club." I kept telling myself, at least they're healthy. But gradually, those payments became a fixed expense, $2,000 a month, for living costs. I worked 12-hour days, yet somehow I lived more frugally than a retiree. I didn't dare buy a new dress, didn't go out for dinner, because a voice in my head always whispered, "Mom might need something next week." At first, I truly believed they'd pay me back. I even saved their text messages full of promises. "Don't worry, Emma, when Sophia becomes more famous, we'll make it up to you." But year after year, the only thing that came were empty compliments. "Emma, you're so responsible. It's great you have a stable job, not like your sister, poor thing, struggling with her art." Yet right after saying that, they'd ask me to help Sophia cover her credit card bills because her ad payments were delayed. I became a walking wallet. They stopped saying thank you, it was simply assumed I would take care of it. I remember one autumn morning on my way to work when my phone rang nonstop. My mother was crying. "The bank is threatening to take Sophia's condo if she doesn't make this payment. Can you help her?" I pulled over, checked the time, 8:43 a.m. I was going to be late for a meeting. I took a deep breath and transferred $3,000. That night, I had dinner with an old sandwich and cold coffee. I opened my laptop to check the news, only to see Sophia's Instagram story dining at an upscale restaurant, captioned, "Treating myself for surviving tough times." I tossed my phone onto the couch and let out a bitter laugh. Sometimes I thought about speaking up, but every time I opened my mouth, my mother reached for her familiar weapon, guilt. "Don't you remember who fed you, who put you through school? Without this family, where would you be?" My father would add, "Money is for helping your own, Emma. If you just keep it for yourself, you'll never be happy." Those words always silenced me. I used to believe that filial duty meant sacrificing without question, so I kept going. There was one time my company gave me the biggest bonus of my career, $25,000 after a successful project. I planned to save it for a new car, but before I could even dream, my mother called. "Your father wants to host a charity gala, but the budget's a little short." "Just 10,000, Emma. There will be press coverage. It'll be prestigious. I hesitated. She added softly, "If you help, your father will be so proud." I said yes. That evening, I stood in the glittering ballroom, watching my parents pose for pictures with wealthy donors, smiling so brightly. When someone asked who sponsored the event, my father answered without a flicker of shame, "The Larson family is always generous." I stood a few steps away, the wine glass trembling in my hand. "The Larson family," he said as if I weren't even part of it. Little by little, I realized I didn't feel anything anymore. Each time I wired money, I wasn't angry or sad, I just felt empty. Some nights, I'd open my banking app and stare at the endless list of transactions: $8,000 for my father's hospital bill, $15,000 for Sophia's boutique, $2,000 every month for my mother. All those numbers had one thing in common: not a single thank you attached. I wondered, if one day I stopped, would they even notice? Or would they just call and ask, "Why hasn't the money arrived yet?" One Saturday afternoon, I met Mia again, my closest friend from college. It was Sunday, and she'd invited me for coffee in South Lake Union. She was the only person I could speak honestly with. We'd known each other since university, same major, both working in tech, but there was one difference: she knew her worth, and I didn't. Mia sat across from me in the sunlit cafe, her face glowing as if nothing had ever kept her up at night. I, on the other hand, sat there with dark circles under my eyes and a mind weighed down. She sipped her latte, looked at me over the rim of her cup, and said bluntly, "Emma, do you realize what you're doing?" I shrugged. "Just helping my family." She set her cup down, tilting her head slightly. "No, you're their free bank." Her words made me freeze. She went on, her tone calm but every word slicing through the shell I'd built around myself. "I'm not saying helping family is wrong, but in your case, they don't value it. They use your money to show off, to maintain an illusion. And you think if you keep paying, they'll love you more. But that will never happen." I stared out the window where the Seattle sun reflected off the lake. I wanted to argue, to say it wasn't that bad, that they just didn't know how to show affection. But the words stuck in my throat. Mia sighed, her voice softer now. "Emma, have you ever asked yourself when was the last time they checked if you were okay?" I stayed silent. She continued, "Family isn't always blood. Sometimes they're just the people who happen to give birth to you and then learned how to take advantage of your kindness." I lowered my gaze, stirring my coffee with a spoon. The milk swirled in white circles, just like my mind, chaotic, without a center. "I know," I whispered, "but if I stop, they'll think I'm ungrateful." Mia looked straight at me. "You don't owe them gratitude. They owe you time, respect, and the youth you've already sacrificed." I forced a small, awkward smile. "You make it sound so easy." She gave me a sad smile in return. "It's easy because they're not my parents. But, Emma, if you don't set boundaries, they'll never stop. They'll take until there's nothing left to take." I knew she was right, but knowing and believing are two different things. I'd spent my whole life inside the circle of guilt my mother had drawn. Family is everything. I used to think that if I tried hard enough, they would finally accept me. I used to dream of one real family dinner where I wasn't compared to anyone, where my parents would look at me and say, "We're proud of you." But now I understood that day would never come. As we left the cafe, Mia and I walked along the edge of Lake Union. The wind carried a hint of salt and a chill that cleared my head. She said, "You don't have to cut them off right away. Just start small, say no once. See what happens." I gave a weak smile. "I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "That they'll turn their backs on me forever." Mia stopped and faced me. "Emma, they've never truly stood by you. You can't lose something you never had." I had no words. We stood there in silence, watching the ripples on the water. I could hear my heart beating, slow and heavy. That night, back home, I opened the cabinet and took out a box filled with old receipts. Each slip of paper was a fragment of memory. My father's hospital bills, Sophia's boutique, my mother's spa treatments, the charity gala, the fundraiser. All of them bore my signature. I looked at them and, for the first time, saw clearly what I'd been avoiding. I hadn't been helping out of love, I'd been helping out of fear of being abandoned. I'd been trading money for a sense of belonging. But they had never given me that. I was the only one holding the thread between us, and that thread was woven from money, not affection. I sat down on the floor and unfolded the last receipt, the $15,000 bill for Sophia's boutique. In the corner was a handwritten note from my mother. "You truly are a blessing to this family." Back then, I thought it was a message of love. But now, I saw it for what it was, a signed acknowledgement that I had just paid another fee to be called their blessing. I folded the paper, placed it back into the box, and closed the lid. I didn't cry. I just felt light. Light in a strange way, as if I had just peeled off a mask that had clung to my skin for far too long. Before going to bed, I got a text from my mother. "Have you sent the transfer for this month yet? Your father needs to pay his golf membership." I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I typed only one line. "I'll check." I didn't say yes. Just that one small hesitation, but my heartbeat felt different. I knew I wasn't brave enough yet to stop completely, but I also knew one thing for sure. Something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt guilty at the thought of saying no. And maybe that was the first sign of freedom. 3 days after my talk with Mia, I was at the office surrounded by tangled lines of code and endless reports when my phone buzzed. The name flashing on the screen made me pause. "Mom." I hesitated for a few seconds. Mia's voice echoed in my mind. "They only call when they need something." Still, out of habit, I answered. My mother's voice came through, soft and familiar, the kind that could almost make me forget how many times it had drained me. "Emma, sweetheart, I finally reached you. You've been so busy, haven't you?" I replied flatly, "More or less." "What's going on?" She chuckled lightly, the kind of laugh I'd learned to recognize as the prelude to a request. "Our family's having a special dinner this weekend. At Azure Grill, you know, that new restaurant downtown, right by the pier. We want the whole family together to celebrate Sophia's good news." I stayed silent for a few seconds, my hand frozen above the keyboard. Good news. Of course it was about Sophia. "What news?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Your sister just signed a new ad deal with a luxury jewelry brand from California. They're paying her very well. It's really the result of our whole family's hard work, so I thought we should all celebrate together." The phrase, "our whole family's hard work," almost made me laugh. Right, the whole family, including me, the one who'd paid most of the bills they never mentioned. I spoke slowly. "You want me to come?" "Of course, Emma. You're her sister. I know you've always supported her." Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind that spun webs I used to get caught in. 7 o'clock Friday night. "I've made a reservation. Don't be late." "Dad?" After hanging up, I sat still for a moment, staring out the window as light rain drifted over the Seattle skyline. I knew this pattern all too well. The so-called family dinner, really just a trap disguised as affection. I could already predict the script. They'd sit around the table, talking about Sophia, about her new success, and then, smoothly as ever, steer the conversation toward contributing a little more, investing in her image, or covering advance costs for the next campaign. And I'd once again be cast as the sponsor, the one who paid, the one who didn't need to be thanked. That night, I opened my laptop and typed Azure Grill Seattle. Dozens of images appeared, the restaurant perched high above Elliott Bay, its golden lights shimmering across the water like a stretch of stars. The menu made my eyebrows tighten. Kobe steak for $420, Maine lobster for $280, wine starting at $900 a bottle. I wondered who in my family thought this was an appropriate place for an intimate dinner. But I already knew the answer: my mother, who always longed to see herself reflected in places of luxury, where the lights glimmered not only on crystal glasses but on her illusion of perfection. I planned to decline. I even drafted a message. "Mom, I'm busy with a project and won't be able to make it." But I never sent it. Part of me wanted to know, would this time be any different? Maybe, Just once, they actually wanted me there for who I was, not for my wallet. That hope was small and fragile, but still enough to make me hold the phone, erase the message, and keep the possibility alive. I told myself I was going for the sake of politeness, to end things on a respectful note. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was going because I still longed to belong. The next day at work, I told Mia about the invitation. She sighed. Emma, just hearing the name of that restaurant, I already know nothing good is coming. Why else would they pick such an expensive place if not to show off? I tried to smile. Maybe it's just a normal family dinner. Mia looked at me with a mix of pity and quiet frustration. You still hope they'll change, don't you? I didn't answer. She placed a hand on my shoulder. Okay, if you really want to go, at least set a boundary. If they mention money even once, get up and leave. No arguing, no tears. Just leave. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to do it. Friday afternoon, standing in front of the mirror in my small Capitol Hill apartment, I saw a different woman staring back at me. My hair was neatly tied up, my black dress simple yet elegant, not flashy, not forced. I chose the same pair of heels I'd bought for my first job interview years ago. They reminded me that I had walked every step to this point on my own. Driving out of the neighborhood, the Seattle sky hung gray and heavy, rain pattering softly against the windshield. I turned on the radio. Fix You by Coldplay began to play, its melancholic voice flowing through the car like it was narrating my own story. Before pulling into the Azure Grill parking lot, I glanced at my monthly paycheck folded inside my bag. It was enough to live comfortably, but not enough to buy counterfeit affection. I drew in a deep breath and told myself, if they touch my dignity one more time, I won't stay silent. Inside, the air at Azure Grill was thick with the scent of melting butter and the soft clatter of cutlery, but to me it all felt like distant echoes. Our table was set right beside the large window where the harbor lights reflected off crystal glasses, glittering as if everything were part of some grand cinematic scene. The only difference was I wasn't part of it. I was the outsider, dragged into my own family's celebration like an uninvited guest. My mother, Diane, in a deep sapphire satin dress, sat perfectly upright as though she were attending a gala. She smiled, her voice light as air. We didn't order for you, Emma. I wasn't sure your tastes are still the same, so we'll just have them bring you some bread. She said it as naturally as breathing, then handed me a basket of cold bread. I looked down at the hard, dry slices and the little dish of butter already melting at the edges. Meanwhile, in front of Sophia sat a $420 Kobe steak cut into perfect slices, the steam rising in fragrant ribbons. She lifted a glass of red wine and smiled at Ethan, her polished, much younger husband. I deserve this, don't I, darling? Ethan smiled back. You always do, Sophia. F-thoting. My father, Richard, took a slow sip of wine and glanced at me with the same look he always used when I was younger, like I was a misbehaving child. You should be grateful you were even invited, Emma, he said in that calm, detached tone of his. It wasn't openly cruel, but the familiar contempt underneath it stung all the same. The words landed like a slap. I looked around the table, watching the three of them talk and laugh about things I didn't understand, conversations I was never part of. I heard my name mentioned a few times only as a vague example. My sister's always working, Sophia said with a half smile, half sigh, the kind of pity that dripped with arrogance. She doesn't know how to enjoy life. My mother chimed in, Emma's always so tense, probably because she's been alone too long. They laughed. I sat still, holding my glass of water, watching the tiny bubbles rise to the surface. All my life, I'd learned to stay silent when I was being belittled. But tonight, that silence didn't feel safe anymore, it felt like a chain. Every word they spoke pierced under my skin like needles. I thought of the nights I'd sent money for my mother's bills, the late hours I'd worked to help Sophia pay off her debt. Every memory flickered back like a film rewinding. I used to tell myself, just endure a little longer and they'll finally see you. But the truth was, they only ever saw my wallet. The waiter approached, balancing a tray of wine glasses. "Would you like to order anything else, ma'am?" he asked politely. My mother cut in before I could answer. "No need, she's fine, thank you." I pressed my lips together, feeling a numbness spread slowly from my throat to my chest. Sophia smiled, slicing another piece of her steak. "You know what, sis? This new brand is paying me almost 6 figures just to wear their jewelry. Can you believe that? I'm so lucky, right?" I nodded faintly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, you really are." My answer made her pause for a second, but then she laughed and went on about her upcoming Malibu shoot and the haute couture gown flown in just for her. The table filled with laughter again. I was the only one who stayed silent. About an hour later, the plates were nearly empty and their wine glasses had been refilled. I hadn't touched anything except my water and a piece of bread that was hard as stone. My mother turned to me, placing her hand gently on my wrist, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Emma, are you still upset about the past? You know I've always wanted what's best for both of you. Sophia just needed a little more help, while you've always been the stronger one." I looked at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I wasn't angry, just tired. Too tired to argue, too tired to search for meaning in her words. When the waiter brought the check, he placed the sleek black folder in the center of the table. I heard my mother laugh lightly. "Oh, what a lovely evening. Richard, I think we'll let Emma handle this one. I forgot my card." My father nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sophia didn't even look up, she just murmured, "Thanks in advance, sis. You're the best." I looked at the bill spread open before me, $3,498, printed clearly in bold, with the waiter's signature underneath. I stared at it long enough for him to shift uneasily beside the table. In that moment, time seemed to stop. I could hear the faint clink of a knife hitting a plate, the soft pour of wine, and somewhere in the distance, laughter detached and hollow. Mia's voice echoed in my mind. "If they bring up money, just leave." The words rang inside me like a final instruction. I took a deep breath, feeling my heartbeat slow. Then I placed my napkin gently on the table, careful and quiet, as if not to disturb anyone. But when I stood up, every pair of eyes turned toward me. "Where are you going?" my mother asked, her voice tinged with irritation. I looked at her, the overhead light cast sharp shadows on her face, making her makeup appear heavier, her smile more brittle. I spoke slowly, each word steady so my voice wouldn't shake. "Send the bill to the ones who ate." The table went silent. Richard frowned, his voice gravelly like stone grinding against stone. "What did you just say?" I repeated, "I didn't order anything, and I didn't eat. The bill should go to those who enjoyed the meal." A few diners at nearby tables turned their heads. Sophia flushed, lowering her voice. "Emma, don't make a scene. This is a fine restaurant." I gave a faint smile. "Exactly. And people with class should pay for their own share." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag and walked away. Behind me, I heard the scrape of chairs and Richard's voice rising sharply. "You ungrateful child." I stepped through the glass doors, and the cold March air of Seattle hit my face. The harbor lights shimmered across my soaked shoes. I stood there for a few seconds, breathing deeply, then smiled, not a happy smile, but one of release. The kind that comes from finally setting down a burden you've carried your whole life. I didn't look back. Behind me, laughter, clinking silverware, and jazz music went on as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. As I descended the steps, I looked up at the glowing Azure Grill sign above me and realized that dinner wasn't humiliation, it was rebirth. It was the first time in my life I chose myself. And with just one sentence, I walked away from the table where, for 30 years, they had forced me to sit, smile, and pay. That night, I didn't just leave the restaurant. I left the role they had written for me since I was a child. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The soft spring light of Seattle filtered through the curtains, reflecting off raindrops still clinging to the glass. Everything in my apartment felt the same as always: the quiet hum of the coffee machine, the sound of my footsteps on the wooden floor, the faint scent of lavender candles. But something was different, not in the room in me. There was a stillness, deep and unfamiliar, as if something inside had finally collapsed and, at the same time, been set free. I opened my laptop, took a long breath, and logged into my bank account. The numbers on the screen stared back at me, each one a reminder of who had been controlling my life. I opened the list of recurring payments. The first line read, Evergreen Country Club, $500 per month, my father Richard's golf membership. The second, Pacific Towers Mortgage, $3,000 per month, the loan for Sophia's penthouse. The third, Bellevue Spa, $200 per month, my mother's beauty membership. And there were more smaller charges scattered across the list, like wounds I'd never bandaged, phone bills, insurance payments, short-term temporary loans no one ever remembered to repay. I stared at the screen for a long while, my heartbeat steady but cold. Then I moved the cursor over the button that read, Cancel Automatic Payment. For a moment, I hesitated. In my mind, I could hear their voices again, my mother's. You can't do this to your family. My father's. Money is meant to help your own. Sophia's. You're good at work, but you don't understand love. I closed my eyes and clicked cancel. Once, twice, 3 times. One by one, the lines disappeared from the list. When the last one vanished, I exhaled the kind of breath that feels like surfacing from underwater after years of being held down. I continued reviewing last month's statements and noticed something strange, a $3,800 charge at Nordstrom. I frowned. I hadn't bought anything there. I clicked for details. The transaction was made using my secondary card, under the name, Sophia L. I let out a short, dry laugh. She didn't even bother to hide it anymore. I immediately called the bank. The customer service representative's voice came through, polite and steady. We can confirm this was made using an authorized supplementary card. Would you like to freeze the card and dispute the unauthorized charges? I replied, yes. Freeze everything, and send me a full transaction history for the past 12 months. When the confirmation email arrived, I opened the file and scrolled down. Over 70 transactions, dinners at luxury restaurants, designer shoes, cosmetics, upscale hotels. The total came to nearly $22,000. I stared at the number, but what caught in my throat wasn't the money. It was one note beside a $1,200 charge. Gift for Mom. Sophia had used the money I worked for to buy gifts for my mother. And without a doubt, my mother must have called her the most thoughtful daughter. I laughed so hard that tears slipped down my face before I realized. I printed every statement, slipped them into an envelope, and marked each page carefully. On the front, I wrote one line. Evidence, keep. I wasn't sure why I wanted to keep it, maybe just as a reminder that kindness doesn't mean blindness. I photographed everything, saved both the digital and printed copies. When I was done, I placed them neatly on my desk, poured another cup of coffee, and felt something shift inside me. The weight that had once pressed on my chest was gone, replaced by something that almost felt like peace. That afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First, it was my mother. I didn't answer, then my father, then Sophia. Finally, a text appeared. What's wrong with you? The bank just said my card was frozen. I'm standing at the Nordstrom checkout. Explain, Emma. I looked at the message, then deleted it. No reply. 5 minutes later, another text came from my mother. Honey, your father can't access the club account. They said it was canceled. Must be a system error? Please check for us. I typed only 3 words. It's not error. I was. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. I picked up mostly to see what she'd say. Emma, what is going on? What did you do? Her voice was sharp, almost shrill. I answered calmly, I just stopped paying for things that aren't mine. She went silent for a few seconds, then sighed, exasperated. You're being selfish. Don't you ever think about your family? I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Mom, I've thought about family for 15 years. Now it's time to think about me." Before she could respond, I hung up. For the first time, my hand didn't shake. That afternoon, I went to the bank and requested that all supplementary cards be locked and my online banking passwords changed. The banker asked why. I simply said, "My family no longer has access to my accounts." She nodded, her eyes showing more understanding than words ever could. When the paperwork was done, I looked down at my signature blue ink, slightly slanted, a little shaky, but firm. I realized I had never seen my signature look so beautiful. That evening, I opened the cabinet and took out the box that held every old receipt and document. I sorted through them one by one: hospital bills, boutique payments, spa memberships, credit card statements. Each piece of paper was proof of the years I had believed I could buy love through kindness. I gathered them all into a large envelope, sealed it shut, and wrote on the front, "Expired." Then I placed it on the highest shelf, somewhere I knew I'd never open it again. My phone kept buzzing. My father texted, "You've disgraced this family. I will never forgive you." Sophia sent a nearly 2-minute voice note, her voice rising almost to a scream. "You don't understand what love is. All you care about is money. I never asked you for anything." I couldn't help but laugh. The irony in her words was almost poetic. I didn't reply to any of them. I blocked every number, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. I had spent my whole life trapped in conversations that never went anywhere, and all I wanted now was silence. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the rain fall. For the first time in years, my heart felt still. No more banking alerts, no more automatic payments, no more guilt pressing on my chest every time I said no. All I heard was the rhythmic sound of rain against the eaves and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. I didn't know what the future would bring, whether they'd let me go or try to pull me back, but in that moment, sitting alone in my small apartment, I felt as if I had finally broken the chains I once mistook for blood ties. When the clock struck 11 that night, I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and scrolled to the group labeled Family. I hesitated for a few seconds, then tapped Remove Group. The screen prompted me, "Are you sure?" I looked at the question, took a deep breath, and pressed Yes. One simple tap, soft, almost inaudible, yet the faint click sounded like a heavy iron door swinging open. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and smiled. In the dark, I whispered to myself, "Freedom truly begins the moment you stop trying to buy love." Hall. The first few days after I cut off their finances, Seattle felt strangely quiet. No more constant ringing, no more pleading emails, no more sweet, manipulative words that made my skin crawl. For a while, I thought I had finally stepped out of the nightmare. But I was wrong. That silence wasn't peace, it was the calm before the storm. 3 days later, as I left the office just after sunset, I noticed something off about my car in the parking lot. My silver sedan, usually spotless, now had a long, jagged scratch carved deep into the paint. I walked closer, my heart pounding as I read the crude letters scrawled across the door. Traitor. The words shimmered under the streetlight, mocking me with every flicker. I didn't need evidence. I already knew who did it. I took out my phone, snapped photos from every angle. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger. Then I called the police to report the vandalism. The responding officer arrived and asked if I suspected anyone. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "My family." He raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof?" I gave a dry laugh. "I will soon." By Monday, I noticed the way my coworkers looked at me had changed. Their eyes carried a mix of sympathy and curiosity, the kind reserved for someone who'd suddenly become a story. When I sat down at my desk, my team lead, Mark, walked over and placed an envelope in front of me. "Emma," he said quietly, "HR received an anonymous letter accusing you of misusing project funds. I know it's ridiculous, but they're required to do an internal review. Just a formality." I picked up the letter and read the neatly printed lines. No sender's name, just vague accusations claiming I had exploited my position for personal gain. My chest tightened. I knew immediately who was behind it. My father's voice echoed in my head from our last argument. "You've shamed this family, and you'll regret it." That afternoon, I got a text from my cousin. "Emma, have you seen Sophia's Instagram?" I opened her profile public, as always, with 12,000 followers. The first story was a photo of a scratched car with the caption, "Some people should learn gratitude instead of betraying their family. Karma is real." I stared at the image, recognizing every detail: the angle, the scratch, the building behind it. It was my car. I couldn't believe she was stupid enough to post evidence of her own crime. The next story was a short video clip: Sophia and her boyfriend, Ethan, laughing in their car. She looked into the camera and said, "Sometimes, justice comes from perfectly manicured hands." I handed the recordings over to the police. A few days later, they confirmed Sophia had been summoned to give a statement. When I got the news, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. What I felt was grief-heavy, exhausting grief, like mourning something that had died a long time ago but was only now being buried. My mother called over and over. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice trembling with anger and panic. "What are you doing, Emma? How could you call the police on your own sister? Family is for forgiveness, not dragging each other into court." I gripped my phone, almost laughing. Forgiveness, a word they'd never truly understood. To them, forgiveness only meant I stayed silent so they could keep hurting me. The next day, I received an email from HR announcing the close of the internal investigation. "No evidence found to support the accusations," it read. Mark came to my desk, resting a hand on my shoulder. "I knew you weren't involved," he said softly. "Someone's just trying to stir up trouble." I nodded in thanks, but inside, I was in knots. I couldn't believe my family had sunk so low they were now sabotaging my job. That night, when I got home, I opened my security camera feed and my heart nearly stopped. But my family still wasn't finished. Within days, my social media accounts were flooded with toxic comments. Fake profiles reposted Sophia's story, accusing me of being an ungrateful, cold-hearted daughter, of biting the hand that fed me, of abandoning elderly parents. A coworker even sent me a screenshot of my mother's Facebook post. "Sometimes, being a parent and loving your child is the mistake." The photo attached was from the dinner at Azure Grill but cropped so only the three of them were visible, as if I had never been there. Beneath the post were hundreds of likes and sympathetic comments. "Poor Diane. Kids these days are terrifying." I read them all, line by line. Each comment was another blade, but strangely, I didn't feel pain anymore. Only numbness. I knew I couldn't let them keep smearing my name. I filed an additional legal complaint for online harassment and defamation. My lawyer, Rachel, an old friend of Mia's, said, "We have enough evidence, you don't need to be afraid anymore. They have ruined their own reputations." I only smiled. I never wanted revenge, but they forced me to protect myself. That night I sat alone by the window. Outside, Seattle was drizzling and the streetlights blurred in the rain. I checked the security feed again and saw my car sitting undisturbed in the parking lot, untouched. I felt a small calm settle over me. A message from Mia lit up my phone. "I know you're scared, but I'm proud you didn't stay silent. You're taking your life back." I read it over and over, then looked out at the city. The rain kept falling, steady and persistent, as if washing everything away. I realized they could slash my car, ruin my reputation, smear my image to the world. But there was one thing they could not touch: the freedom in my mind. For the first time in my life, I no longer feared them, and that to me was the first victory. A week after I filed the complaint, I received a call from Rachel Meyer's office, Mia's friend who specializes in family financial abuse and harassment cases. Her voice was calm and steady. "Emma, I've reviewed your file. To be honest, this is a very clear case. You have everything. Financial records, evidence of vandalism, social media content, and defamatory behavior. My job now is to turn those into justice. I was quiet for a moment, then said, I don't want revenge. I just want peace. Rachel answered, and we will get you that through the law, not through emotion. A few days later, I went to Rachel's office in downtown Seattle. It was small but tidy, shelves lined with neatly labeled binders, sunlight spilling across the polished wooden desk. Rachel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, handed me a thick folder. We're filing for a restraining order against 4 people: your mother, father, sister, and her husband. At the same time, we'll submit a civil claim for damages, both material and emotional. She flipped through the pages one by one. Bank statements, wire receipts, emails, screenshots of Sophia's stories, footage from the security camera showing the vandalized car. Each piece of evidence was carefully numbered. The direct losses total about $22,000, she said, then looked up. But the more significant figure is the $265,000 you've paid over 15 years. I'll present that as proof of sustained financial exploitation. The number made me shiver. $265,000. A sum I had once called love, now transformed into evidence in a courtroom. Rachel continued. The hearing will be held at King County Court. All you have to do is tell the truth. I'll handle everything else. I nodded, feeling both lighter and heavier all at once. On the day of the hearing, Seattle was drenched in rain. I wore a simple gray suit, my hair tied back neatly, the folder clutched in my hand. Inside the courtroom, everything felt cold and sharp: the glow of fluorescent lights, the faint scent of paper and stale coffee, the echo of footsteps against the wooden floor. When I entered, they were already there. Diane, Richard, Sophia, and Ethan. The 4 of them sat in a row, looking like a perfect family portrait trapped behind glass. My mother's eyes flickered between anger and pity. My father sat rigid, arms crossed, expression carved in ice. Sophia kept her head bowed, pretending to look fragile, while Ethan stared at me with quiet defiance. I took my seat across from them, my heartbeat steady but my hands icy cold. Rachel leaned closer and whispered, "Breathe, Emma. This is the moment the truth gets to speak." The judge entered, a stern middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a firm voice. After calling the court to order, he looked at Rachel and asked, "Miss Myers, what would you like to present to the court?" Rachel stood, her voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, this is a case involving sustained emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and systematic harassment within a family. My client, Miss Emma Larson, was financially exploited over a period of 15 years, with the total amount exceeding $265,000. After she terminated her financial support, the defendants retaliated by vandalizing her property, defaming her online, and submitting false complaints intended to damage her career." Rachel began to present the evidence, piece by piece. Bank statements projected clearly on the screen, each transfer marked with familiar notes. For Dad. For Sophia's store. Spa for Mom. Each number struck like a blade, no longer signs of affection, but of transactions. Then she displayed the photo of my car, the word "traitor" carved deep into the door, followed by the security camera footage showing Sophia crouched beside the vehicle while Ethan, her husband, filmed on his phone. The courtroom fell silent. Sophia's face turned pale. My mother looked away, her lips trembling. Next, Rachel continued, "Please review the attached exhibits: public social media posts made by the defendant, Miss Sophia Larson, in which she admits to the vandalism and defames my client with false accusations." The screen showed the story. "Karma is real," the image of my scratched car filling the display. The judge's brow furrowed. He turned toward my mother. "Mrs. Larson, do you have anything to say about your daughter's conduct?" Diane swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure. "Your Honor, it was just a harmless joke. Sophia didn't mean any real damage. We only wanted Emma to come back to the family." Rachel replied instantly, her tone cool and precise. If a harmless joke involves carving the word traitor into a car and sabotaging someone's career, then that isn't family, it's a crime. My father cut in, his voice low and sharp. This girl has gone too far, she's always thought we were using her. But who fed her? Who paid for her education? Who made her what she is today? Rachel didn't let him finish. Mr. Larson, taking credit for her success doesn't erase the fact that she financed you for years. These are her wire transfers to your account totaling $8,000 in 2018 for so-called medical bills, which, according to hospital records, were already fully covered by insurance. And the courtroom went silent. I looked at my father, and in that moment, I no longer saw the man who once taught me to ride a bike or the one who used to wish me happy birthday with my mother's apple pie. All I saw was a stranger angry, cornered, not because he'd been wronged, but because his source of control was gone. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. That's enough. I've reviewed the files, the evidence, and the statements. He paused for a few seconds, his eyes settling on me. Miss Larson, would you like to say anything before the court issues its decision? I stood. My body trembled, but my voice stayed steady. Your Honor, I don't want them to suffer. I just want peace. I spent years paying for their love, and I've learned that love can't be bought. All I want now is to live the rest of my life without fear. The judge nodded, jotting a few notes before speaking again. The King County Court hereby issues its ruling. A 2-year restraining order is granted against Diane Larson, Richard Larson, Sophia Larson, and Ethan Miller. They are prohibited from approaching or contacting the plaintiff, Miss Emma Larson, within a 200-meter radius, under any direct or electronic form of communication. Additionally, the defendants are ordered to compensate the plaintiff a total of $22,000 for material and emotional damages and to remove all related posts, images, and videos concerning the plaintiff within 48 hours of this ruling taking effect. I heard the gavel strike, bang. A short, simple sound, but it echoed louder than any voice I'd ever heard in my life. Rachel squeezed my shoulder gently and whispered, "You did it." I didn't cry, and I didn't smile. I just felt a warm current move through my chest, something people probably call justice. When I left the courthouse, the rain was still falling. They were standing on the steps, my mother dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, my father turning his back, Sophia staring down at her phone, Ethan muttering curses under his breath. I walked past them without stopping. No greeting, no glance. Between us, everything was dead. But that death wasn't as painful as I'd imagined. It felt like I'd finally cut out a malignant tumor I'd been clinging to, thinking it was a part of me. That evening, I went with Rachel and Mia to a small cafe by Lake Union. We sat quietly, not saying much. Rachel lifted her glass of wine and clinked it softly against mine. "What does freedom taste like?" she asked. I looked out at the lake, the city lights dancing on the ripples, and said, like the first breath after being pulled up from under the water, "I won." Back home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the digital copy of the court order. Restraining order approved, valid until May 2027. I saved it, then closed the screen. That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly, no dreams, no jolting awake, no fear of a phone ringing in the middle of the night. In that sleep, I heard the rain outside my window steady, gentle as if it were washing away every wound that remained. And I knew that starting tomorrow, my life would truly begin. 2 months after the trial, on a bright summer morning in Seattle, I received a bank notification. The $22,000 settlement had been deposited into my account. The words, "Settlement from Larson Family Case," glowed on the screen, and I felt a strange calm wash over me. There was no sense of victory, no bitterness, just closure. I took a slow sip of coffee and opened an email to Rachel. "I've received the funds. Thank you for everything." She replied a few minutes later. "Emma, I'm so glad to see you've reclaimed your freedom. Use this money to do something that makes you happy." I reread that line several times, then smiled. Happiness, something that once felt distant, now seemed like a real choice within reach. I decided to split the money in half. $11,000 went to Women Rising Seattle, an organization that helps women escape toxic and financially abusive family relationships. As I signed the donation receipt, it felt like I was closing a long chapter of my life not with anger, but with gratitude. The coordinator, a kind-faced woman with a gentle smile, said, "You just helped at least 6 women get a chance to start over." I nodded, my throat tightening. "So am I said softly. The other half, I used to do something I had always dreamed of but never dared to go far away. I booked a flight to Iceland, the land of light and ice, where warm rivers of lava run beneath frozen earth. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at Seattle growing smaller beneath the clouds, the buildings, the streets, the harbor where I once walked away from Azure Grill. All of it slowly faded, making room for a brand new page. When I arrived in Reykjavik, the wind was sharp enough to sting my skin, yet I didn't feel lonely. I rented a small cabin near Lake Thingvellir. Every morning, I made coffee and stepped out onto the balcony to watch the mist lift from the water. There were no phone calls, no emails from my mother, no judging eyes except my own. In this place, I learned how to be silent without feeling empty. I kept a journal every day, writing down small, ordinary things, the sound of waves hitting the rocks, the faint sulfur scent from the hot springs, the feeling of melting snow on my palm. And I realized the world had always been vast, gentle, and beautiful. I had just been trapped for years inside a cage called duty. One morning, I drove to Gullfoss Waterfall. Mist blanketed the cliffs, and sunlight struck the roaring cascade, turning it into a ribbon of silver. I stood on a rocky ledge, inhaling the icy, clean air deep into my lungs. Amid the thunder of falling water, I heard myself whisper, "I'm free." A simple sentence yet heavier than any court verdict. I thought of my mother, my father, and Sophia no longer with anger, nor hatred. Only a necessary distance between people who had reached the limits of one another. They no longer had the power to hurt me, and I no longer bore the burden of saving them from themselves. In the days that followed, I visited the Blue Lagoon, a geothermal spa cradled between frozen mountains. As I sank into the warm, mineral-rich water under the cold northern sky, I felt my body unwind in a way it never had before. I looked around at the strangers soaking quietly, their faces calm and unbothered, and I understood. I didn't need to belong to anyone to find peace. I only needed to belong to myself. When I returned to Seattle, everything looked the same, the sky still gray, the streets still crowded, the office lights still burning as if they'd never been turned off. But I was different. I no longer hesitated to speak in meetings or held back my opinions for fear of upsetting anyone. Mark, my team lead, noticed the change. One morning, he called me into his office. "Emma, the board wants to promote you to senior engineering lead," he said. "You've led the team exceptionally well these past months." I blinked, surprised, unable to speak. He smiled. "You stood firm after everything that happened. That's what real leadership looks like." I thanked him, and a quiet wave of emotion rose inside me, not pride, but peace. I started going out more often. Coffee mornings with Mia, early runs around Lake Union, and weekend hikes into the mountains. I even picked up photography again, something I once loved but abandoned because I never had time. On weekends, I'd drive out toward Mount Rainier, capturing clouds draping over its snow-capped peak. When I looked back at the photos, I realized they all shared one thing: light. Even under the grayest sky, even through layers of snow, there was always a glimmer breaking through. Maybe that's why I loved photography. It reminded me that life works the same way. One small beam of light can change everything. One evening, while cleaning out my closet, I stumbled upon an old envelope labeled "expired." Inside were the faded receipts, invoices, and bank slips I had once kept as proof of everything I paid for my family. I sat on the floor, opened it, and smiled. The papers were yellowed, the ink barely legible. I folded them neatly and dropped them into the trash. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't need them anymore. I had spent too long holding on to evidence of my pain, as if I needed proof to justify it, but now, I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I knew what I had lived through, what I had endured, and most importantly, that I had made it out. That night, I stepped out onto the balcony. It was August in Seattle, and the rain was still falling softly. I opened the bottle of Icelandic white wine I'd brought back, poured myself a glass, and sat down. The city lights shimmered on the wet surface of the bay, reminding me of the glow inside Azure Grill that night, the place where everything fell apart, but also where I finally found myself. I could still remember the feeling when I said, "Send the bill to the ones who ate." Back then, I thought I was isolating myself. But now I understood that was the first time I ever chose me. I took a sip, letting the crisp tang settle on my tongue. My phone buzzed a message from Mia. "The Blue Lagoon looks incredible. Have you found peace yet?" I typed back, "Not found built." The wind swept through, carrying the scent of rain, earth, and something else, freedom. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze run through my hair, and whispered, "Thank you for not going back." It wasn't meant for them. It was for me, the woman who once trembled, who once exhausted herself trying to earn love, who once believed her worth was measured by what others needed from her. Now I knew the truth. My worth lived in my ability to let go. I stepped back inside, into the soft-lit apartment that was entirely mine, just me, the quiet, and the gentle hum of music from the speakers. On the table sat a framed photo I'd taken in Iceland, Gullfoss waterfall veiled in mist. I rested my hand on the frame and smiled. Every wound, every collapse, every goodbye had led me here to this moment, this freedom, this peace that no one could take away. I turned off the lights, letting the faint glow of the city fill the room. Outside, Seattle was still raining, but inside me, the sky was finally clear.